I'm Lisi Keeker, a longtime studio owner turned founder here at Studio Grow. Just a few years ago, I was building my studios the hard way. So I didn't have the team, the budget, or most importantly, the time. Now, if you speed up to today, I sold my wildly profitable studios in the mid 7 figures while serving my community in ways I could have only dreamed. Now I work with thousands of boutique fitness studio owners in over 40 countries, and I am so blessed to share some of the best tested strategies for our industry every single week. I created this podcast so you'd always have clear, actionable processes, tried and tested advice, and just some good old-fashioned inspiration. So you can take steps to grow your studio and turn it into a powerhouse empire just like I did. If you're a studio owner who's ready to impact your community and see major growth in the process, or you're prepping to become one, then you're in the right place. So let's kick this off, shall we?
Do you want to try out some new class formats, but you're a little afraid about losing money? Well, hi, my name's Matt Hanton, and I am the Assistant Director of the Start Your Studio Profitably program with Studio Grow, and this is the Business of Boutique Fitness podcast. I am joined today by Caroline.
Hey, I'm Caroline Planback. I'm the team captain of the Grow Your Studio Profitably program at Studio Grow, and I am excited to chat about this. Testing classes is something I am actively doing in my studio right now, so I am living this.
I'm excited to hear all of your experiences, Caroline, and what I love about this is I love addressing with my clients anything that I feel like is a super important thing that we do, but is fear-based, right? And so much of the reluctance that people experience with this comes from a place of fear. And as business owners, we really need to recalibrate the way that we look at that, right? Because risk, not fear, is actually a really important lever that we should be gauging when we approach these sorts of things.
Yes. I always say, I'm a risk-averse person, but I love a calculated risk. And I think that's what we have to do here. And as entrepreneurs, a lot of us do have that, oh, I could do this thing. Or what if we add this? Let's add this. And suddenly we're so far from the core mission of the business or what we really do exceptionally well. And so I think we have to start there. If I wanted to think about adding a new format or my modality to my schedule, where would you guide me? Where would you have me start?
Exactly, because I think it's a really important call out that not every format is necessarily worth testing. The first place that I always encourage all of my clients to start when they're starting to think about this and implementing it, because, stagnation, particularly on a class schedule, is like death, right, to our retention rates. So it's really important that we're keeping things fresh, but we also know our clients are habit-based. So we can't kind of mess with it too much. So the very first thing that I'm going to start with is making sure that a format that I'm testing is brand aligned. The last thing that I want is to muddy the waters and cause confusion as to why I'm a yoga studio, but all of a sudden I'm doing a high intensity HIIT class on spin bikes.
Yeah, no, it has to be aligned. And I would even back it up a step further. And if you're an open studio, I would have you really look at the last 90 days of utilization by class. I would give your time, your class format, your instructor, and just look at all of the variables there. The last thing we want to do is take away a class that was performing well and people love to pop in this new spin HIIT yoga modality that may or may not work. And also, we don't necessarily just want to add classes to the schedule and add overhead without clear thought behind it. So I think looking at what's working and what's not working well is where we need to start.
And being proactive in terms of how we do this as opposed to reactive. So often I see, well, I need to test this new class because my competitors are doing it, right? Or I've been getting so much feedback from clients about this. And it is really important that we respond to feedback, but we really want to be proactive in terms of how we approach, evolving our schedule as opposed to reactive.
Yeah. And the way I've approached this in my studio and as we expanded and added more modalities was a lot of client contact and a lot of client surveys over the course of a few years, honestly, to see what other, we started as a yoga studio. What other memberships do my members have? And we started seeing that, they have a gym membership over here and they might take Pilates over here and they use this wellness service. And it wasn't that we had to add all of those things in all at once. That would have been insanity. modality, but slowly starting to test, maybe it's a mat Pilates class. And I think when you start adding in classes like this, you also have to really think through, is there a clear revenue opportunity here? How am I going to market this? I can't just put a class on the schedule and expect it to fill and solve all of my problems. So how would you start to detail out and kind of sort out, is there an opportunity here for the business?
I think you just absolutely nailed it. When we talk about the why behind why we're starting this conversation, it absolutely needs to be in response to an opportunity that you've identified. You kind of mentioned it earlier too, when you said we don't just want to throw another class onto the schedule because then we're losing money, right? We want it tied to a revenue opportunity, potentially a gap in our schedule that's going to service a new cohort of clients that we haven't tapped into yet, potentially a retention problem that we're missing out on. For example, maybe, there is school drop off or something happens when one of your classes is on. And if we move the time or we throw something on after that, then we could be tapping into the school mums, for example.
Yeah. And something I'll also see is, maybe we want to add a new format or modality to speak to a new client demographic and start to bring them into our studio. That's really going to take a lot of strategy behind the marketing side, because these are people that don't exist within the studio yet. It's definitely possible, but it'll take a bit of work. And then I think once you do have that foundation, you really have to think of, how can I get this new population that maybe only has space for a class once or twice a week on my schedule as it's new? How am I going to educate them on why they need to use all of the other things we do and the things that we do really, really well, because we've streamlined those first?
Yep. And I think the why can just be summed up really nicely by saying that class testing should be a revenue strategy, not a creative outlet. Okay, and I know that that's not always the funnest thing to hear, particularly as studio owners. We got into this because we are so passionate and creative with this sort of thing, but the basis for that entire starting point should be coming from the perspective of revenue strategizing and not just being a creative outlet.
Yeah. And listen, we have to really think through brand direction strategically. If my studio is called X Yoga and I start adding in all of these hit classes, that's a really confusing and disjointed experience. So maybe if I want to add in all these new modalities, I have to think of a rebrand. That's going to take a lot of work as well, I can tell you from experience. And so you really have to think of this big picture, and maybe adding a new format is your 1 year goal, and you're going to do all of the work in the meantime to really make that happen and make it happen effectively.
Yeah, so step one is kind of identifying your why, making sure that it's grounded in a revenue driving or problem solving strategy, right? Like we just spoke about. And then I would say that the second step is to do this in a really, and you said it earlier, risk adverse kind of way, right? Which I love, which is having a minimum viable number of classes on the schedule to gather the data that you need to make an informed choice. If you just throw one class on within the week, then maybe you're not going to be tapping into its full potential. Yet at the same time, you can't invest too much money in this before you know it's viable. So you mentioned you were kind of doing this with one of your studios right now. What does that look like for you? And how did you go about figuring out exactly the number of classes to try?
Yeah, I mean, listen, creating a schedule, I feel like, is always one of those things from the outside. You're like, this is going to be so much fun. I'm going to figure out where to put all these fun classes. And then you get into it, and it is like, it's so much. And there's so many places that you could put these classes. What I like to look at when I'm creating a schedule is, especially if I'm adding new classes, is I've got my core people. My 6 a.m. crew is different than my noon, is different than my 5:30. Who is this new modality speaking to, and what time zone are they generally going to live in? And then again, to your point, I don't want to just add one, but I don't want to add 17 of these classes. I need to think of strategically how a membership could be purchased upon this. Maybe I'm going to add it Tuesday, Thursday at 9 a.m. That's my 8 time a month membership. And my goal, once I get these clients in and using the class, is going to be to get them to use maybe my other modalities so that I can upsell them long term and get them really bought in on using the whole experience of the studio.
I absolutely love that. I think that that's so good. And let me ask you this question as it relates to that. So you kind of decide, I'm going to put them on Tuesdays and Thursdays because that ties in nicely with that. But when we go to sell memberships, we always correlate that with like a marketing spend. How are you approaching that when it comes to these trial classes? Are you going to spend on advertising for this initially, or are you just going to kind of keep it more internal?
I think that depends. I think it depends again. Am I putting this class on the schedule because I think it's going to speak to my current client demographic, or am I trying to bring someone new in? If I'm trying to bring someone new in, I'm definitely going to create a more comprehensive marketing strategy, I probably wouldn't put paid dollars behind this. I want to go really grassroots because again, that connection is going to be really important here. What I would also think of when adding these classes to the schedule is who's teaching it. I would at minimum want to have a lead teacher and a backup. I don't want to be stuck if our teacher cannot teach it. And now we've got this great new modality and the teacher is sick.
Yep.
But I also want to think of an instructor who, I know can command a room and can really get people excited about trying something new and isn't afraid to kind of go above and beyond to market this class in an organic fashion.
I love that too. And I think a really key element of all of this when it comes to marketing is the word trial. Okay. Because we have to remember, what if it just doesn't land?
Yeah.
What if our clients, yeah, sure, they were giving us all this feedback. And so then we responded and put it on the timetable and now no one's going, right?
Yeah.
So it needs to have a finite period of time that we're using to determine the viability of this class.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would also play into that, try to start small. If, we want to test out maybe Pilates, let's not go by 8 reformers. Let's try out like a mat concept with things we already have, like low overhead, low spend, really organic at the start, and then let it scale from there once you've got that kind of proof of concept that this could be something for us.
Yeah. So one thing that you called out a little bit earlier that I want to dive a little bit more into, because I think that this is an important factor in kind of figuring out our MVP, right? Our minimum viable program for how we trial this. And that comes down to the payroll side. So I really believe that testing new classes should not increase your payroll. I would love to see these trial classes incorporated into the existing amount that we spend every week, yet that can be tricky to kind of navigate. So what's your approach with how you've done that?
Yeah. I mean, again, really strategically looking at the studio, looking at those classes on the schedule that maybe aren't as high performing. And listen, ideally, we're always looking at our class schedule and cutting the ones that aren't performing. But if we're not starting there, I think to your point, yes, we don't want to just increase payroll without a defined outcome or at least what we think will happen. And so being really intentional about this. When I add new classes, I might start in once a week. If I talk about my 6 a.m. time slot, that's a core group of people that love to move early in the morning. We added in one hot Pilates class and got those people really excited and bought in to try it, had a really strong instructor at that 6 a.m. And now that's a part of their weekly movement routine. From there, we started to do that with some of our other time slots. And, what started as 2 classes on the schedule, as I'm building out the schedule for the new studio, it's now going to have 10 iterations of that format. But again, we started so small with a really strong teacher who was not afraid to talk to our members and get them so excited at every class she taught to get them in. And that led to waitlisted classes pretty frequently.
Yep. And so, okay, we've kind of got our why, right? We know why we're doing this. We're kind of thinking about the how, so logistically, how we're going to implement this. I think the next key step is to really know what your success metrics look like. So as you're executing on this trial phase, you can identify, is this solving the problem that I initially created it in order to do? Because most studios will not define what success looks like. So they keep pushing for a class that just isn't working, maybe because anecdotally they've felt like it should. So what are some of the key success metrics that you look out for when you're going through a trial of a new class format?
Yeah, I'm always looking at utilization, and I don't expect the class to be waitlisted on week 1. I mean, we know that there's going to be that slow buildup, but I want to see the trajectory trending upward. So again, this is where tracking class attendance is so key. And listen, like I don't really work in the day-to-day of my studio, but the one thing I cannot give up is manually inputting the numbers of each class every day. I love to see how that is growing, and that's something that I communicate with my instructors really clearly. I don't want an instructor to be so worried about how many people in their class. I think there are bigger things that they should be thinking about, but I do want them to be thinking about this and how their role in the studio impacts the broader scope of what opportunities I could provide them if this class fills. So I just want to see that upward trajectory. And listen, if at 4 weeks of having this class on the schedule, we're still sitting at, I would say, under 50% utilization, there's something wrong there. I need to think about, is this worth keeping? Do we want to switch it out? And at the same time, I don't want to just flip-flop my clients and be like, this is hot yoga this week, next week it's Pilates, and in 3 weeks it's going to be spin. So like we have to do that really intentionally, and I think have a plan of what if this doesn't work out? Where are we going to go from here?
Yeah, this really speaks to the heart of one of the things that I find the most important mindset shifts that every studio owner should make. Okay, this is around if you don't define what success looks like, every single experiment is going to look worth like it's worth keeping. So it comes down to the emotional mindset and the emotional analysis of something versus the analytical analysis of something. So it might be so exciting and so fun to have this new class on the schedule. And it might be 100% sold out in the first week or two because everyone is so excited. But then we might see a decline in utilization. And that's not necessarily a bad thing because if it reaches like a homeostatic level and then it maintains or it grows back incrementally with time, like you said, then I definitely think that that's an indicator that this program likely has longevity, right? If it's not fully utilized straight off the bat, but then it does grow slowly, then again, that's an indicator. But we need to be sure that when we're analyzing the data, we're doing so from the perspective of a business owner who is strategic and making solid business based decisions, as opposed to an owner who is leading with their heart and is just, it's so fun to have something new.
Yeah. And this is where I think leadership skills on the owner's part really comes into play. Does your team know what's going to happen if this class doesn't hit X% utilization in 30 days? And I think also, again, I'm always looking at averages. Yes, I'm filling in numbers day to day, but I want to see where this class is going over the course of 30, 60, 90 days. And if I'm not seeing that trajectory upwards like I want to, this is where we have to audit the class. And it might be more than the class. Maybe I'm realizing that front desk doesn't know how to explain the benefits of this class or the why I want to take it. That's something I need to talk to that is going to affect the outcome here. Maybe it's the sequencing doesn't make sense, or it's too challenging for our client type, or the instructor isn't commanding a room in a certain way. The music is doing this. Like there's so many things. So I think if you're going to test a new modality, you have to be prepared to kind of get into the weeds of it, just like you did when you launched your studio.
I love that. And I want to be clear too. When I'm talking about making these business decisions, there is definitely a place for those more qualitative, anecdotal feedback, emotional elements to how we approach making this decision. But I still think that we can be strategic in terms of how we gather that side of the data. I think it's a very different question to ask a client as they're walking out of a trial class. Did you enjoy it? How was it? Versus, do you see yourself enjoying that class every week for the next 6 months?
Yeah.
That's a very different question, right? Because I'm sure when they're working out, they're going to be like, it was great. I feel great, right? But asking them if they could see themselves doing it consistently for a long period of time, that's really what is meaningful to us in terms of member feedback.
Yeah. And I always love to build members up if we're introducing something new of like, hey, you started with us with this goal and you reached that goal. And your movement practices have evolved and we're going to evolve too. Yes, this new format may be different and challenging and in ways that are different than the one you tried before are, but we're here to support you. Like, we're going to keep you going. I'm teaching this class again on Wednesday at noon. Am I going to see you there? Like, those kinds of touch points can go a long way.
Absolutely. And so, okay, so I feel like we've spoken through the life cycle of how to approach this really well. And hopefully, all of the data indicates that you've landed the next big thing and that it's going to make you a whole bunch of money. But sometimes that's just not the case. Yeah. And that is totally fine. So it's really important to have a graceful exit plan when it comes to how you're going to approach potentially then removing it off the schedule. Is that something that you've found you've had in your studios?
Totally. And again, I think we need to give whoever's leading this class or the entire team the expectation. People want to live up to expectations. If an instructor comes to me and is like, I want to put this dance class on the schedule, like there needs to be a plan behind it or it's going to flop. And so I want the entire team involved in that and knowing what's going to happen if we can't keep this class on the schedule. Are we going to replace it? Are we just going to take it away? Have you ever seen a studio effectively do this really well or seen anything you liked?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it really comes down to the communication piece. So like I mentioned earlier, being really clear with everybody, not just your clients, but also the instructor that's teaching the class that this is a trial. Okay, we need to be really clear around when we're going to have a decision made on that. So it's a time frame that is really transparent with people that this is a 4 to 6 week trial of this class, for example. And then the communication piece, we have follow up and we have explanations around why. It's absolutely not a failure if this class doesn't work out, because you have really valuable data, and then you can collaborate with the instructor and be like, okay, what elements of that class worked really well? And is there an alternate format that we could trial that's going to speak to those things and supply that demand within our internal market, but also not have the same issues that we experienced with this particular format?
Yeah, I think that internal team debrief is so important. And to get everyone's perspective on what happened here. Like, was it our marketing? Was it the execution of the class? Did we not provide enough training? Did we not educate our members correctly? There's so many things can be at play here, but using those as, guide points for if we want to try this again. It's not a hard no that we can't ever test a modality again if the first time something flops. We're just going to learn from that and reiterate and come back a little stronger next time.
Yeah, and testing formats should increase revenue, and they should increase energy within the studios, and they should minimize risk. Okay, when you're doing something new, there's always going to be an element of that. But like we said right at the start, right, this should not be a fear-based decision. It should be a calculated and educated risk that we're taking on in order to achieve those increases in those other things, which we all want to see.
Yeah. No, I love it. I think, we've touched on a lot here. I think a lot of us might come into testing a new modality from more of an emotional, creative space. And we've really set some guidelines and guardrails for doing it more strategically, because at the end of the day, we want to see studios evolve and continue to grow their membership base and revenue. And this is a great way to do it when done correctly.
Absolutely. And like we said, stagnation is just, it's not going to work, right? So we should absolutely be doing this. In terms of a cadence of this, I think it really depends on the scale of your business. For example, back in Australia, I was managing very large scale recreation centers with extremely robust and multimodality group fitness schedules. So we had this set up on a quarterly or seasonal cadence where we would spend, all of winter kind of analyzing the data and preparing for what our spring timetable would look like. And we were basing that based off what we had seen in autumn or fall for our American listeners. So you have to determine the right schedule for you in terms of how often you do this, because it is an important consideration that, like we said, our clients are creatures of habit. We don't want to be too disruptive to that. However, keeping things fresh and energized is super important too.
Yeah. Consistency, evolution, strategy. That's the name of the game here when testing new modalities.
Well, Caroline, thank you so much. And good luck with all your class format testing that you're doing right now.
Thank you. Thank you.
We can't wait to hear how it goes. All right, guys, that has been our episode. Thank you so much for listening in. As always, like, comment, give us a follow wherever you listen to us. And we cannot wait to see you again on the Business of Boutique Fitness podcast. I'm just going to record that outro again because I messed it up. So whoever is editing this, just cut and then use this one. Well, Caroline, thank you so much. Good luck with everything that you're testing with all of your new class formats. We can't wait to hear how it all goes. And guys, thank you so much for listening. We cannot wait to see you again next time. Make sure you give us a like, follow wherever you're listening to us, and we will see you again on the next episode of the Business of Boutique Fitness.